long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
Good evening, good morning, and welcome. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm your host, J.V. Johnson. Jason has the night off, but it's good to have everybody here with us tonight. This is a show that we've had in the works for a while. Actually, we really started the process back on, I think it was April 15th. Is that the day? I should know this. It was when the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris burned. A very tragic day, a very tragic event. The world lost a precious monument, and hopefully, even though it'll never be entirely the same, hopefully it'll be rebuilt and stand another 1,000 years. But on that day, we had read some things on the internet about Nostradamus having predicted the fire that engulfed Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. And we were curious about that, so we went to the expert. We got John Hogue on the program, and we talked about that particular topic. John had a different opinion of that, but we only had him on for a segment because that's all we had time for. It was last minute. But at that point, we realized we had never really had a serious conversation on this program about Nostradamus and his prophecies, predictions, about the man himself. And we decided that we needed to set that up, and we did set it up, and tonight is the night we get to do that. So our guest tonight will be John Hogue. He is a prophet, an author, and a Nostradamus expert, and he'll be here to discuss Nostradamus's predictions and his own predictions. That'll be coming up in just a few minutes. Looking ahead in the week, we've got G.L. Davies with us tomorrow night. He is an author and an investigator. He'll be sharing the true account of a couple that was torn apart by paranormal activity and a paranormal entity, which served as inspiration for his novels called A Most Haunted House and Haunted Horror of Haverfordwest. And then Thursday night's program, we've got two guests. In the first hour, Robbie Thomas will be a returning guest to the program. He's a psychic criminal profiler, and we'll talk about his new book. It's called Murder, Missing Persons Cases. And then in the second hour, Lee Roberts will be here. Lee is a UK and English ghost hunter, and he'll talk about famous hauntings throughout England that he's investigated. That is the second hour of Thursday night's program. So we've got a great week lined up for you. Of course, Friday is a best of, as it is every year. Every year, listen to me, every week. It's only Tuesday, right? Yeah. Couple things to remind you of, and then we'll get into a break and we'll bring our guest in. But stop by Scaricon.com. It's a fantastic event happening in Framingham, Massachusetts, June 7th through the 9th. It's coming up quickly. It features celebrities from horror films and sci-fi films and paranormal entertainment. Plus, there'll be parties, there'll be panel discussions and Q&A sessions with the celebrities, film screenings all weekend long. A tremendous collection of unique vendors will be on hand. It's a great weekend. You can come for the day. You can come for the weekend. It's family friendly. It's just a lot of fun. It's called Scaricon. I know. It's called Scaricon. And you can get more information by going to Scaricon.com. And then you'll see the celebrity guests and a bunch of other information there. And the other thing I want you to do is swing by YouTube and go to the YouTube channel that features an archive of this program, plus some other great material. And it's just J.V. Johnson on YouTube. Go there and search J.V. Johnson. Easy to find. A lot of great stuff there. Subscribe to it if you would. Click the bell icon if you want to get notifications of live streams and or uploaded videos, and just be part of our community. We really appreciate you doing that. There's a lot of great stuff going on, and we invite you to join all of it. Okay, so we're going to go to break now, and when we come back, we'll bring John Hogue in. Again, John is a prophet, an author, and a Nostradamus expert. We're going to be talking about all of those things on tonight's program. It's Beyond Reality Radio. We'll be right back. Hey, it's JV here. You know I've asked for your support in the past, and I'm going to do it again because it's really, really important. And there are a couple of ways you can support the show, and it's so inexpensive. Now, you can go to Patreon, and you can become a Patreon supporter, and we really, really encourage that. But there's also another way. If you look at the description of the podcast, if you're a podcast listener, and you scroll down to the bottom, there's a way to support the show directly through the podcast app. And it's only 99 cents a month. It's less than $1. You probably have that change in your couch right now. That dollar $1 a month, less than $1, goes a long way in helping us produce this program, provide great interviews for you during the course of the week. I thank you in advance because the support is so important to the program. We will be taking your phone calls and questions as well later in the program at 844-687-7669. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm JV, and we are really excited about tonight's program. Like I said, we've been talking about this for a while, and we had John on a few weeks ago when we were talking about the Notre Dame Cathedral fire. We realized we hadn't had a really serious, full discussion about Nostradamus, and no show like this is complete without doing that. So we're very pleased, privileged, and honored to have our guest, John Hogue, join us again. John, thank you so much for coming back. It's great to have you here on the show.
Thanks, JV. I'm glad to come back. We had quite a fully packed short interview a few weeks ago. Now we have a couple hours.
Yeah, that we did. We did. Before we get into the Nostradamus stuff, you are probably the world authority on Nostradamus. You're also an author, and I note that you're also a prophet. Tell us a little bit about that part of your life.
Well, I've always been fascinated with the patterns of history, and was kind of shocked into it just before my 8th birthday when I had the first of several very powerful premonitions about things coming into the world. And I was basically, my birthday in 1962 in October was, I later found out, the scheduled date for the beginning of the invasion of Cuba, the airstrikes on Cuba, if the Cuban Missile Crisis hadn't been solved. So as a child, I think I was in second grade at the time, for a very young child, I had this premonition that this thing was coming, that my world as a child, since a child is so narcissistically focused, my brother, my father and mother, and the world and my friends in my elementary school, I had this impression that it would all be gone. And in a way, that kind of propelled me into a fascination very early in my life into global news and into the study of history and the study of the patterns that happen in the past that seem to be repeated in the future. When I exhausted my study of the past, I started looking, as well as trying to answer that fundamental question of why do I exist. On my path kind of developed later on in life into studying the future history that is often embedded in the records and books and scriptures of people who are seers, who have a gift of seeing the future potentials. And I stress potentials because what I came to understand pretty soon in the study was that there is a certain dogmatic view that religion has given to prophecy for its religio-political needs to be, well, this is the preordained vast plan of God or whatever, and it's written in stone. And what I've discovered, especially through the study of Nostradamus over these 40 years, is that he was a prophet that was quite a renegade. He basically indicated in his prophecies that there's free will, that God's great plan, if there's a God at all, or rather than just an imaginary friend of adults, is actually, the future is a huge question mark. It's a potential. I've heard it said by my teacher in India, Osho, that the past is memory, the future is imagination, and where we always live ever is in the present moment. This is where eternity lies. This eternity kind of gets forgotten. It ends up being turned into a regurgitation of what we know, the past. And then that past is projected on the great unknown, but an open question, the future. So in a way, people generally have never actually seen the future. They're seeing the potentials of their past being repeated as potential echoes. And so that seems to be a very interesting issue to me, because in one of the books I wrote, of the 48 that I've written in 21 languages since 1986, is that I tried to put together all those prophets who do the hardest thing that's ever possible in prophecy, because it requires so much predictability that it's almost impossible to do, and that is to actually date the future and be accurately dating events openly, not symbolically, not trying to piece together some of Nostradamus' indexing and say, aha, here's a date, but literally saying in the year, 1792, was basically Nostradamus said in his letter to Henry the Second in France in 1558, where he talked about the great persecution of the church would end in the year 1792 during the vulgar advent. That means the advent of the people, the peasants, the commoners. Now, Nostradamus' bias was he was a royalist from the 1500s. And he's saying to the kings that they will think this time that has come is like a new age, and they will actually create a brand new calendar to celebrate it. Now, it is a fact that in the year 1792, the French Revolution created the First Republic. And to celebrate this new age, this age of reason, as they called it, was to create a completely new calendar system. And that calendar system survived until Napoleon ended the French Revolution, became Emperor of France in the 1800s, early 1800s. So, this is just one example where, on a rare occasion, with no codes and no possibility of it being interpreted otherwise, a person says, in this year, which was around 275 years ahead
right.
of where he lived, this happened. And so I took all those people who were able to do that, and not many, and I made a timeline in my book, The Millennium Book of Prophecy, which was published in 1994, which looked at 777 predictions of a lot of the same prophets looking at doomsday and bloomsday, the potential of either or, an end of the world or a new world for humanity's future. And in that timeline, you will see a tremendous buildup of dates coming up to the year 2000, and then it begins to peter out around 2000 to 2012, and then suddenly the same control group of seers are seeing next to nothing. Now, to be fair, a lot of them are Judeo-Christian based, Muslim Judeo-Christian. So all the races, all the religions that are born out of Judaism in the West have an eschatological view that, there's a time coming where the world is destroyed and a new world is created, and time ends, the world ends, and God judges the world. That there's variations on all three religions there from the Jewish root. This is not how it's seen in the East, but this is how it's seen here, and most of our prophetic literature is pretty much from the Western side, although I look at a lot of other stuff as well. So anyway, so there could be a bias, there could be a bias of Edgar Cayce and other people who are really good at dating, even Nostradamus, that kind of drops there. Now, Nostradamus and Cairo, the palmist man, as most anybody who's seen a palmistry book has seen Cairo's book. He was also a very good prophet. He made dates as well that were quite fulfilled. Now, he's one of the few that looks at some appearance of a messianic figure in the year 25th century. And then the other important date that's out there is from Nostradamus, the year 3797 A.D., where the sun somehow expands in its size, apparently turning into a red giant much sooner than expected, and actually expands to the orbit of Earth and devours the Earth in flames, the great conflagration. But the rotations of Mars will continue, and he says the ethnographies, which is one of his odd words, self-made words for the races of humanity, will have long left the Earth, and he says many of them shall be going to Aquarius and will stay there for a period of time, and others will venture to Cancer, and live there perpetually. Now, this is the only time in Nostradamus, and it's an important point to make, which I'll be coming back to throughout these 2 hours, is it's so important and so rare for anyone out there who's making all these remarkable, imaginative predictions about, for instance, what happened with Notre Dame. The Internet is filled with all kinds of amazing opinions about what happened,
right,
attributed to Nostradamus, that are based on ignorance of 16th century French. It is remarkable how often we make Nostradamus better than he is or worse than he is by whitewashing over the real message in his prophecies because we don't know what we're doing, with some rather pathetic, mediocre interpretation that suits the need for instant satisfaction that seems to overwhelm news, fake or otherwise, of our times. So the thing, quickly to the end of the point about this, what does it mean if the people who are so good at dating suddenly end their dates? There's two possibilities that I've come up with in my meditation on it, and that is, one is that we don't have a future, that we, in the next 2-3 decades, are going to undergo a mass extinction event, mostly, if not from World War III, that hits us unexpectedly. And I'm speaking from prophetic potentials that are out there, that in the next 20, 30 years, runaway global climate crisis is going to do it. All of this is interestingly alluded to by many prophets, including Nostradamus, that include rising oceans, the crops of the world under incredible intercontinental droughts, and also great famines. I mean, the situation that could happen, one of the things that science is showing is that by 2030 or sometime in the 2030s, we're not going to make that 2-degree Celsius limit that the Paris Accord
right,
fantastically believes, and without consulting science, we can do. We've already baked into the system, so say many scientists, enough heat in the oceans and the atmosphere that, by the way, the heat doesn't immediately come to us. Like, if, for instance, if I burped right now, that CO2 that I just put out in the atmosphere will not have an objectifiable impact for another 10 years.
John, I got to cut you off right there. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Please support the program. Go to patreon.com/Johhaw. That's JOHAW. Welcome back to the program. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm J.V. Johnson. Thanks for being here. Our guest tonight is John Hogue. We're talking about Nostradamus, plus John's own prophecy and predictions. And John, I apologize for having to cut you off so abruptly there. We just are back against the wall, a hard break. But you were talking about the amount of time it takes for, kind of cause and effect here. Why don't you pick it up where you left off?
Yeah, we're talking about three things: the fact that dates drop off after the turn of the century,
right?
The fact that there are a lot of indications in Nostradamus and other prophecies that, indeed, one of the possibilities of that is, and I was looking at first the negative possibility, and then I'd look at the positive possibility, is that there are, if time ends and the dates end, then one possibility is the human race is maybe facing extinction level event, and now things that have happened since 1994 when I published this book that are looming, that are basically seeing that the science is actually, unfortunately, catching up to what I've been saying for 30 years, is that the danger of a climate heating up is kind of come much faster than science has been, basically, to get their funding. I know a lot of people who are climate change deniers are saying, like, well, they're just trying to scare people to get money. I mean, I understand the common sense of that statement, but the actual facts are that science has gotten its funding by actually lowballing, doing the best-case scenarios, because if they freaked out the government, they wouldn't get funded. But unfortunately, and I say this especially for my own idea, because when I look at what I see in the future, how I interpret prophecies and make my own, what I call the oracle, often use this oracle, and although a lot of people think that I agree with what I'm saying, I most of the time don't. But I've come over the many years to understand that I have to trust this, even though I don't understand, don't even agree with the vision. I mean, when you have predicted, as I have, every presidential popular vote victor in the United States presidential election since 1968, and also explain by what margin, there's a whole lot of opportunities to pick presidents that you wouldn't vote for, whether they were Democrats or Republicans. So I'm 13-0. Wow. I have not missed a single one since 1968. Wow. And that's all documented. And so that's just one situation. So with that in mind, going back to the main thought here, is that what then? There's a lot of indications. I'm actually putting together a book right now that's going to look at it, of something I thought I wouldn't be writing for another 5-6 years, but because of the acceleration of things, it has not yet really hit the news, but it will in the next 2 or 3 years, that things are accelerating much faster now. Because of the concern that can come up. Something I've been warning for a long time is that it's even now the science would just start to get more realistic, with the worst case scenario being the case scenario. The problem is that it is the intangible that is hard for science to predict, but is out there in the more subjective intuition of prophecy, is that one of the carbon sequestering systems of the planet, or many of them, are at a point now where they are no longer able to sequester all the new carbon that we've put into the system, which is 175 gigatons, 1,750 gigatons of CO2 since estimated has been put in the system since 1850, and most of that, 2/3 of that, has been put in the system in the last 35 years. So this sudden burst of this energy has this greenhouse gas blocking situation. It's heating up the oceans mostly. Is already baked into the system. As I said about, if I burped, you wouldn't see the impact for another 10 years. Well, we've already baked into the system a 130-foot rise of sea levels. It's not a question of if. It's a question of when, how slow, or how sudden it happens. And so, coming to grips with these things were very hard for me. It's odd that you can be seeing these potentials, and I've been looking at these potentials in prophecy since I had this epiphany watching Soylent Green, the movie with Charlton Heston and Edward G. Robinson, about a future in the year 2022 of New York City with 60 million people. Yeah. And Soylent Green, of course, was this mysterious new food for a world that was basically dying from overpopulation and pollution. And I mean, a lot of it was kind of a B-movie action film, more like TV than a real cinematic film with its amazing moments. Right. But I had an epiphany. I was like a junior in high school, and I had an epiphany that this could happen. This could happen. And in my mind's memory, my intuition, I realize now, said that this movie was set in 2030. And I felt that all the way back in 1973 when I felt that. It was only recently that I went back and studied the film again that they actually set it in the year 2022. That's when I realized that my feeling of 2030 was less a fact but more a prophecy, an indication of the importance of that year. And it's intriguing to me because I was feeling that so many years ago, back in over 40 years ago, and now whether people think it's a malarkey or whether they think it's real, if these people are trying to create a Green New Deal, it's an interesting thing to see that the year 2030 has become a kind of crossing the red line year. What is also intriguing and rather horrifying is that it's also showing a lot of indications that as we enter the 2030s, we will no longer, this idea of 2 degrees Celsius being a holding point is ridiculous, ludicrous. It's politicians playing scientists. Scientists say we've already baked in the system more like 3 degrees Celsius into the system. And if we pass 2 degrees Celsius, that's when grain growing around the world, the main foodstuff, not only for ourselves but also for our livestock, becomes unable to be produced to scale of around 8.3 billion people that we'll have around the turn of 2030. And so that kicks in all these prophecies of famine that have been seen all across the board in all different prophetic traditions. The most famous of them being Nostradamus basically saying, I see a great famine approaching that will pop up and disappear in certain places, but then eventually become global, worldwide. It will be so far-reaching, complete, that people will eat bark off the trees and steal babies from the breasts. And it's global. It's a global famine. And the thing that happens is if the super system of agriculture, which is based on growing to scale enough food to feed 8.3 billion people, even if badly, if that collapses in crop failures in the 2030s, then you are looking at as many as 1 in 10, only 1 in 10 people surviving.
Wow. This
famine. Wow. It would be a collapse of the human population, which is becoming not just science fiction anymore. It's becoming a potential. And so with that said, that's the negative possibility of the dates that I was speaking of prophets that were able to see the future through dates, and suddenly the dates just drop off as the turn of the century came, that we don't make it. So that's one possibility. Now there is another possibility. The other possibility is that maybe we come late to it. Maybe there will be a great loss of human life, no matter what. But just like we had to come late to the dangers of fascism in the 1930s and 40s, that ended up in a Second World War that killed 60 million people and wounded a 250 million people in 6 years. We now have a much bigger global emergency that's coming a little slower to us because there's nothing like a creeping catastrophe that people don't usually see until it's too late and it's upon them. You know, it's like the creeping catastrophe of somebody who smokes a pack a day for 40 years and
sure.
There's no indication of any problems until one day he goes to the doctor and says, "Oh my God, my lungs got riddled with cancer." You know, how did that happen?
Right.
And you know, it's all too human for people to be caught that way. And unfortunately, that's how climate crisis is creeping up on us. It's like we've been blowing too many packs of CO2 into the system, which is just enough, even though it's a very small number, it's just enough, like a gram on a scale, that it tips the balance in favor of climate emitters, agents in our Earth, rather than climate sequesterers of carbon. And then there's this other issue, and it gets back to that thing I was talking about how there's the unknown that even science is not sure of, but they're certainly seeing signs of it. The unknown that happens if something completely tips one of these major carbon sequesters. I mean, we're just years away from forests being carbon emitters because the fires around the world have been so many and so large that now forests are losing their role as a sequester of carbon. This is the kind of pattern that has happened in other mass extinctions. And all the mass extinctions, the last 5 that the Earth has had, have all except for one been global warming based. They were natural or from volcanic eruptions that put so much carbon in the atmosphere that it changed everything. This is the first one that's human induced, And the one that didn't have any carbon involved with it is, of course, the one we all know the most, the one that killed the dinosaurs, the asteroid the size of Manhattan that struck Yucatan and wiped out the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. So all these mass extinctions have happened. We are now, and science has made it official, we are now in the sixth mass extinction. There's a tremendous dying off going off of animals all around the planet, and also kind of the basic root food animals that are breaking the chain of the food chain in the oceans. The corals are stressed out from the warming oceans, and we are basically so this situation, which is definitely in prophecy, is upon us. Now, if we start seeing things soon enough that makes the world of humanity sound the alarm, then humanity could come together and fight this thing, and perhaps greatly diminish the danger of mass extinction of ourselves as well as the ecosystem. I mean, Nostradamus called it in his Mabus prophecy, which is his third and final Antichrist prophecy. He had three Antichrists. The third was called Mabus. He's our contemporary. And in the times that he would emerge, it would be a time, as Nostradamus called it, where there would be a great unraveling of the world of people and animals. And it's a phrase he's not used, and it's unique. And it's the way he uses phrases that tie a lot of his quatrains together, that are scattered out of sequence purposefully. I mean, one of the reasons why Nostradamus is a bit cloudy and coded is that he was very concerned and obviously understood that his prophecies would be used by people to change the future. He even describes how they might be used as propaganda weaponry, weaponized to, and as did happen in World War II when the Nazis first used Nostradamus' prophecies, his real prophecies, to prove that they were going to win the war. And they dropped leaflets all across France and England before the invasion of France in 1940. I have in my books entries from Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda ministry, talking at length how we will force Nostradamus once again to bend his words to our will. What's lesser known is that Winston Churchill also set up a group of astrologers in England, and he, in fact, I knew some of the people who their fathers were involved in this in Element Books when I was publishing with them. And heard the story from the inside of it that they created all kinds of pamphlets and things dropped on Germany to prove that Hitler was going to lose the war. The irony of it is that the Nazis were actually authentically looking at real prophecies of Nostradamus, whereas the Allies, the so-called good guys, were making fake Nostradamus predictions. The best of which can be seen online if you look for when America came into the war, we also got into the game of making Nostradamus speak for us. And it was also completely fraudulent prophecies attributed to him called, and Nostradamus says it's so. And these little shorts were broadcast all across America during the war years to show that Nostradamus saw that democracy would win in the world. It's kind of like a proto-Walter Cronkite voice is kind of... And the funny thing is that if anybody actually read Nostradamus, Nostradamus was actually against democracy. He was a royalist. He believed in the divine right of kings. He was also quite a raving Islamophobe for the time, but if you understood the times, he might have had some grounds because the Ottoman Empire was really on the march. That's
right. Hey, John, we got to jump to break here. Sorry to cut you off again, but we got to get these breaks in. So we'll come back and continue our conversation with John Hogue. It's Beyond Reality Radio. Don't go away. Please support the program. Go to patreon.com/Johaw. That's JOHAW. Welcome back to the show. It's Beyond Reality Radio. Our guest tonight, John Hogue, prophet, Nostradamus expert and scholar. His website is hogueprophecy.com. He's got 48 books to his credit, 21 languages, including The Essential Nostradamus and A New Cold War. John, we have just a minute and a half here before we have to go to our top of the hour break, and I wanted to ask us a specific question to kind of help define what our conversation will be in the next hour. What's the difference between prophet and prophecy versus a psychic and psychic prediction?
A bending of semantics. I think, the problem with prophecy is that it's kind of an open-ended word. It can mean a message from the divine coming in the guise of a Christ or a Kalki, or it's a prophecy or a forecast. I think a lot of it is just it's just political semantics. If you make predictions, you can call it prophecy, you can call it forecast. If you feel that hides you a little behind a more euphemistic word, I just use the word prophecy.
Now, we've got about 30 seconds here. You've got 48 books to your credit. I think they're probably all available on your website. What do you recommend somebody, if they're new to all of this, which of your books do you recommend they start with?
Well, there are all kinds of moods for people who want to know about the future of America. I would say Beyond Alt-Right, Alt-Left, a community of Americans. It looks at what could happen beyond this polarity that's kind of heading us towards almost like a civil war situation, which I was saying could happen. But there's so many. I mean, I just go to HogueProphecy.com. It's HogueProphecy.com. And just check everything out there, because or go to my Amazon page, just type in John Hogue, and then look at my author's page. Right. All the books are there, and it's whatever your thought or your interest, it's there.
Perfect. All right, we're going to come back and talk more with our guest, John Hogue. It's Beyond Reality Radio. Hey, it's JV here. You know I've asked for your support in the past, and I'm going to do it again because it's really, really important. And there are a couple of ways you can support the show, and it's so inexpensive. Now, you can go to Patreon, and you can become a Patreon supporter, and we really, really encourage that. But there's also another way. If you look at the description of the podcast, if you're a podcast listener, and you scroll down to the bottom, there's a way to support the show directly through the podcast app. And it's only 99 cents a month. It's less than $1. You probably have that change in your couch right now. That $1 a month, less than $1, goes a long way in helping us produce this program, provide great interviews for you during the course of the week. I thank you in advance because the support is so important to the program. Good evening, good morning, and welcome. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm your host, J.V. Johnson. Jason has the night off tonight. We're talking with John Hogue tonight, prophet, author, Nostradamus expert. We're going to continue that conversation in just a few moments. His website is HogueProphecy.com, 48 books to his credit. A reminder of what we've got coming up the rest of the week for you on Beyond Reality Radio. Wednesday night, that'd be tomorrow night, G.L. Davies will be with us. G.L. is an author and an investigator, and he'll be talking about the true account of a couple that was torn apart by paranormal activity and a paranormal entity. It inspired two of his novels. Those are called A Most Haunted House and Haunted Horror of Haverfordwest. And then on Thursday night, we've got two guests for you. In the first hour, Robbie Thomas will be returning to the program. Robbie is a psychic criminal profiler, and he's got a new book out called Murder Missing Persons Cases. We'll be talking about that in the first hour. In the second hour, Lee Roberts is a ghost hunter from England. He'll be talking about famous England haunting cases that he has investigated. And then, of course, Friday night is a best of program, as it is every Friday here on Beyond Reality Radio. Again, our guest tonight, John Hogue. John, it's a pleasure to have you here. I want to get a little more information about Nostradamus. You know, I think most people know what that name means when you use the name. However, I'm not sure everybody knows who he was and, you know, what his background was, what his time frame was. He was making his predictions, his prophecies in the 16th century. Tell us a little bit about Nostradamus as a person.
Well, he was born in 1503 of a recently Christianized Jewish family who chose to become Christian so they wouldn't be expelled in a pogrom that was about to happen in Provence, which is the Midi, the southern part of France. He lived to be 62 years old and died in 1566. If he had not written any prophecies, he would still be remembered in French literature for his accounts of being a doctor fighting the plague, and which are quite remarkable accounts, narratives of that period. He was a man of, I will tell you a lot about the things that Hollywood has said about him, and History Channel and other people have mythologically branded upon him that aren't so true. Nostradamus did not spend his whole life living, eating, and breathing prophecy. It was one of the many pursuits that he had in his life. He was truly a Renaissance man of the high French Renaissance period. He made his living as an apothecary, then a wandering doctor, physique, and he also had married in his first family that he built with his first wife. All, including his wife, died of what looks like malaria. So, because he was complaining about how he and another dignitary, a knowledgeable man, Scaliger, they're both residing in Agen. You got to remember, knowledge. We take knowledge take it for granted now in our times, but back then they were the rock stars. If you had some great thinker or somebody in your town, it was like if you had a great soccer team or something like that. So he and Scaliger, who was kind of a proto-botanist, told the city fathers of Agen that if they didn't drain out the foul humors that were wafting out of the swamplands around the walls of Agen, that they would leave. And, of course, the city fathers promised to do that, and then in 1538, there was a plague. Another thing to understand is people used to call any kind of illness plague,
right,
of some kind or another. So he couldn't save his children and his wife. And the circumstantial evidence, I contend, point to it being a death through malaria, not through any pestilence of the bubonic plague, which was also the main killer at that time. It had come back since the 12th century. It was endemically sprouting up here and there in the southern French areas. And at one point in 1544, 45, and 46, I think 1546, he was summoned to the capital of Provence, Aix-en-Provence, and he spent, either the other doctors had fled from the town or died, and he single-handedly fought the plague for about the bulk of a year. Of course, the plague was over when winter came and the frost came. There were a lot of things that in my book, my biography on Nostradamus, which is the first full-body biography ever written on him. Strangely enough, I always wondered why, with so much material there, why has it not been written yet?
Right.
And so I wrote it so it would be published on his 500th birthday in 2003, at the anniversary of it. And it was only when I was in the middle of writing it and putting it together that I realized why people didn't do it. You cannot separate the historical Nostradamus from his myth. So I didn't try. I said, all right, we're going to make an unorthodox biography that will look at a man and a myth. So I call it Nostradamus, A Life and Myth. And I show how basically it became the stories, that you cannot separate the two. And in some ways, Nostradamus even perpetuated his own myth, which later became true. I mean, to all the people who've made a career debunking Nostradamus, and some of them have savaged me quite a lot over the years, Penn and Teller, James Randi, See, I don't know what it is about Las Vegas parlor magicians, but when they no longer are getting the crowds, I mean, I'm very glad to have been a kind of an object of keeping them making a living, because what do you do when you're a parlor magician and you're no longer being that successful in Las Vegas? I don't know, although Penn and Teller are doing pretty good. So anyway, I realized that there's one thing that even the skeptics, well, they're not skeptics, they're cynics who don't even know what the word skeptic means in Greek. Skeptikos in Greek means to investigate. And there's no, like the silence, the crickets after that simple term, means no front-loaded blind belief or blind debunking. You simply, true skepticism has no, it's neutral. It has no negativity. Like we always say, well, I'm rather skeptical about that. I always say, to be more correct linguistically, I say, well, I'm feeling rather cynical about what you just said.
Right.
Which means I've already kind of decided that it's bunk, but I haven't investigated. So skepticos means simply to investigate. Just like doubt, which has also been given a negative connotation, literally means its Indo-European roots to hover between two possibilities, yes or no. So I've spent a lot of decades looking at Nostradamus in the way that I claim is a true skeptic, who does not go into Nostradamus with a negative attitude like James Randi has in Penn and Teller. They literally start their investigation of me or Nostradamus by saying, and now we have a real nut job to look at.
Right.
It's the first lines of Bullshit Show, which I was on their first show. I was their first victim. And what they had done is they had snuck in a guy who came to film me and interview me for a few hours at my house. And they said, oh, it's kind of showtime. We don't really have a name for the show yet. We're just trying to put it together, and would you do an interview for us? So, I realized later that it was a classic mentalist game trick, to just get an interview from me.
Right.
Because they were afraid that I would not do the interview. Of course, what James Randi found out is that I'm very much willing to do the interview on my terms, which means you can't play your games. You have to actually come to the interview knowing what you're talking about,
Right.
And you do not have last word, because that's the classic thing Randi used to always do. He wouldn't do a show unless he got the last word. And if you have the last word and time's out, then there's no way to kind of show that a man like that doesn't really know what he's talking about, So, he's a showman. That's what he does. So anyway, the thing is that even the great James Randi cannot deny this one prophecy that Nostradamus made, even though poor James always speaks in big, broad absolutes, which reminds me of what Obi-Wan said to Anakin. Says, only the Sith speak in absolutes, but that's another level. That's another issue. So he used to make these absolute statements. Nostradamus never got anything right, which means he never read Nostradamus' prophecy, which is absolutely right. He said, I will be much more famous after my death than I ever was while alive. Is that not true or not?
I don't think you can argue that one. I don't think there's any question there.
You can, but it's like, these poor guys, they just, because they're not really skeptics, they're cynics.
Yeah.
A cynic can never be contradicted, but a skeptic is always open. And because of that, I came to understand, and in our last talk a few weeks ago, I kind of touched upon it, how so many people have... Well, it's happened all through Nostradamus' legacy. I'm putting together a book on the Notre Dame fire, and I've actually elaborated and expanded on what I said on your show, and I will also include an updated version of something I had at the end of the Nostradamus, A Life and Myth, the biography life story. It was an appendix that was called The Life and Afterlife of Nostradamus, where I dated all the milestones of his life and all the milestones of what's happened in his afterlife, how his prophecies spread, how they became famous, how they became controversial, how people fought over them. And, I hadn't updated it since December of 2013, so I thought I would add at the end of this book a 5-year update, because lots of things have happened. And I've been, the odd thing of it is that because I am kind of, whether I like it or not, I am kind of pointed to as the go-to guy in the world.
That's right.
I've done hundreds of documentaries in 4 continents, thousands of radio shows since 1987. In the beginning of last year, in 2018, I actually had Russian crews come from 3 different networks because they were interested in Nostradamus and the Edgar Cayce prophecy about Russia being the hope of the world after the Soviet Union ended. And so I found myself unexpectedly I'm sure my CIA file got a lot bigger. Talking to what ended up being, it was each month of the first 3 months, there was one of these network shows, national network shows across 16 time zones of Russia, and I guess I ended up talking to 100 million Russians. And, I mean, I've had some big audience, and CNN International, I one time did a show across Europe and Africa at prime time that they told me was broadcast to 1 billion people.
Wow.
With a B.
Wow.
On his birthday anniversary. And Rosemary Church was it's one of my favorite anchors. So I've flustered Sean Hannity on air on the 31st of December 1999. Hannity and Combs, that's the show.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah,
Alan Combs.
Sure.
Yeah, Alan and I used to do a lot of shows just prior to his death. Unfortunately, it happened last year, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Sean and I were having the show, and we're talking about climate change, and he had in prophecy. I had put out my book, 1000 for 2000, startling predictions for the new millennium. 1,000 predictions. And so I'm doing the show, and I'm in a satellite feed at Fisher Broadcasting, and it's going really well. I mean, Sean isn't kind of coming in to kind of kick things up, and then I can feel it because I started to talk about a prediction I made in 1998 for that book, where I said sometime in the first 5 hurricane seasons of the new millennium, either Miami or New Orleans will be flooded by a super hurricane. And he pushed his button. He just said, aren't you kind of a doomsayer? I mean, you're always saying, and then I just did the thing you never do on radio, and I wouldn't do that to you either, but I did it on TV. I just went, no, and just let the pause.
Right.
He had to fill it, and he's like, what? And then he just said, well, I mean, you say this and you say that, and then I cut in again and said, have you read my book? And he went, well, and then I go, well, people who have read this book know that half the predictions, 1,000 predictions, are about doom, and the other half are about doomsday, how we could fix things. And so, because it's free will. And so he kind of went, well, okay, I did read. There were some positive ones at the end. Okay, let's cut the commercial. So he cut the commercial. And so I'm unplugging in the Fisher broadcast in Seattle because it was a live show in New York, prime time, and I get a phone call from the producer's line, and what's this? Pick up the phone, I go, hello? And I hear this voice on the other side. I hear Sean in the background doing the next segment, and people, I don't know who it was, but it was members of the crew or something. They said, we just want to tell you, we want to congratulate you on the fact that you flustered Sean Hannity, because nobody flusters him, so it's very rare. So congratulations.
You get a plaque or something for that. All right, hey, listen, John, we got to jump to break here. We've got some folks on hold too. We're not going to be able to get to the calls right yet, but we're going to do it as soon as we can. It's Beyond Reality Radio. We're on with John Hogue. Don't go away. We've got a lot more coming up. Did you know that online retailers like Amazon have constant deals that can save you money on the things you buy every day? It's no joke. Save 40%, 50%, even 80% on great products, and all you have to do is know about them. Noodle Shark is the way to be alerted when something good is coming your way. Noodle Shark is the social media page that lists great deals that not only save you money, but give you the deals before anyone else has them. All you have to do is find Noodle Shark on Facebook. Search it as The Noodle Shark. That's The Noodle Shark, because you deserve to save too. Become a shark and save. Okay, welcome back to the show. We're in a time crunch here. We're going to take a quick phone call for John, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to the answer until the other side of the next break. But this is Barry in North Carolina. Barry, a great friend of the show. Hey, Barry, welcome.
Hello, JV. What's up in Cooperstown? I hope it's going great, and I'll get straight to the point with John Hogue. John, I've talked to you before. I love to listen to you on Coast to Coast with George Norrie and Tommy Danhauser. And here's my question. Gosh knows, John, the year 2100, 81 years from now, what do you see mankind being like? And I'll get off the air, and thanks a lot for taking my call.
That's a great question. And, John, I'll warn you, we've got about 30 seconds here, but we can address this on the other side of the break, too.
Well, what I'll do is I'll prep for the other side. There's a fascinating prophecy by Edgar Cayce where he describes life. It's one of the other rare dated prophecies. So at the end of the break, after the break, we could talk about it.
All right, that's perfect. Thank you for the call, Barry. We will address that on the other side of the break. Again, our guest tonight, John Hogue. His website is HogueProphecy.com. He's got 48 books to his credit. There's a lot of great information on the website. Visit the site at any point, and you'll be glad you did. We'll take this break. We'll come back more with John on the other side. It's Beyond Reality Radio. Please support the program. Go to patreon.com/Johaw. That's JOHAW. Telephone number is 844-687-7669. Before the break, we had Barry from North Carolina call, good friend of the program. His question for our guest, John Hogue, was, where is humanity going to be in the year 2100? Where is humanity going to be, John?
Well, according to Edgar Cayce, in one of his rare waking dreams, that means he most of the time, Edgar Cayce, he's called the sleeping prophet because he used to lay down and put himself into a trance where his 1/10 consciousness would go to sleep, and then this deeper awareness underneath that would then speak and answer, give healing advice, and on rare occasions give prophecies. And I've often learned a lot from Cayce in that everything that he was saying in those trances was copied, typed, and filed and dated. So since 1990, since everything I've published, I do a similar thing so that people can see where I get things right, and I can see where I get things right and wrong, and then learn from the wrong how people. I've learned a lot about how I and people project themselves in the way and misread symbols. So, with that in mind, his vision was very unusual. It was during a time where he woke up from a sleep, when he wasn't in trance, he wasn't doing the daily trances, and he said, I had this dream where it was the year 2100, I was reincarnated, and I was reincarnated, I think, in Nebraska, he said, and there were these two scientists who came in a cigar-shaped ship, and apparently they were bald, and they had very long beards, and actually, if they did a movie of it, I could probably play with them, and they had these weird glasses with all these lenses on them, and they checked him out. They brought him into the cigar-shaped ship, sort of like a UFO kind of ship, but it's human, and they floated over the world, and he got to see all the vast changes that happened. I mean, it is one of his famous Earth Changes prophecies that saw the whole western United States slipping off into the ocean, and that the West Coast came all the way up to Nebraska. He also talked about other things he saw, but particularly he saw an attempt to rebuild what had been once New York City, which had been completely devastated. He didn't know if it was devastated by war or natural disasters. I get the feeling, whenever I read the prophecy, I get the feeling that there's certain elements of that prophecy that could very well end up as a potential coming true. It seems like it's a lot less populated world, and I get the feeling, although it's not really objective on my side, but because it's not actually stated, but I get the feeling of a humanity that's much less in numbers recovering from some great apocalyptic natural disaster or something. And now when I look at what's ahead of us just in the next few decades, I really feel like it's possible that he's describing the human race in their process of recovering the earth. I often feel that humanity's first experiment in terraforming is going to probably be in trying to restore as much as we can the earth that we've nearly destroyed in a mass extinction.
Wow.
There won't be many of us, but this gets into a whole other. I'll just be brief on this because I could go a few hours on this one theme. I would just simply say as little as I can, concisely, is there's a theme in prophecy that if you take the dogma off of it from the religions as well as the non-religious, and just look at the essence of it as if you didn't know all the front-loaded Sunday school stuff or Friday school stuff, if you went to a Muslim prophecy study, or any religion, you just see it as if with fresh, innocent eyes. There's a theme where humanity divides, where humanity, it's in the Hopi prophecies too, is where humanity, and they look at it as the great purification by fire that's coming to the fourth world being destroyed. There's 4 worlds that have already been through this process, according to Hopi, and it's paralleled by other mythological histories, which obviously have some basis in fact, that in the 5th world, it's the last. Almost everybody says the last world was destroyed by a flood, Noah, and all of that. The 5th is by fire. But what is the fire? It seems to be an ecological disaster. That's what the native peoples that I talk to have been saying. And they're so much more in tune as guardians with obligations to help the earth. I often feel that one of the reasons why native peoples, the first peoples of the United States, of America, North America, and South America, seem to have a better understanding of the balance of nature is important to nourish, is they probably did a lot of damage to it when they first came here and killed all the primary beasts, slaughtered a lot of the main animals for hunting, and then had to go through hard times of kind of paying for the price of not respecting the mammoths, not just massacring them all, and so I think what we're about to face as a human race is a global version of this, where the entire species of humanity has to face the fact that we've been dragging this old caveman idea that nature is our enemy, and it was when we were only a few thousand cave people walking around a very hostile world. But we have not only conquered nature, nature's on the ground, we're kicking it in the side, and still kind of projecting this atavistic fear that we got to conquer nature. And we're not only conquering nature, we're just about to destroy it. So hopefully, before we actually destroy ourselves in this process, and certainly the civilization would go first before the people surviving would go, I'm hopeful that if Edgar Casey's potential future and Nostradamus' about 3797 talking about even humanity going to other planets, because when I said in the beginning of the show, when he talked about Aquarius and Cancer, that's the first time he ever talked about them not as astrological signs or constellations, but as places where people are going, which is pretty unusual.
Yeah.
And basically when the Earth is devoured by the sun expanding to a red giant, they do that. Another interesting thing about that is that, although astronomers would not agree with anything Nostradamus would say, they do agree on one thing. The yellow dwarf of Sol, our sun, when it goes red in a red giant, will probably expand to the diameter of the Earth's orbit. It has enough mass to do that.
Right.
How did Nostradamus know that?
Yeah,
right. So anyway, this division of humanity, my teacher Osho used to call it the old humanity. He used to say it for decades, that they will commit auto-suicide. That's the humanity that cannot live without its identification with the past, cannot have the courage to break with the past and embrace a whole new way of living. That basically, on all levels, religious, political, social, economic, a completely new adaptation. That those people, and probably be the vast majority of the human race that we have today, will not know how or even want or will expect their imaginary, magical interpretations of the future to make them winners despite all realities. And they will basically drop dead from their own fear of change. That's what the Hopis say.
Right.
And so, but there is out of that death of the old past-oriented dinosaur humanity will become a new humanity. And I have books coming in the future that will look at that, a humanity that is loving and celebrating, that has no dogmas but is simply religious, that is connected to the earth, who waits for its wisdom to catch up before its science. And that humanity in the more renegade prophets of history, the ones that were recorded because they were accurate, but they didn't kowtow to the usual expectations of organized religions of their times. I've collected all of them. They often show up in my books, and even Nostradamus was one of them, although he's more famous and mainstream embraced, but that was because he hid a lot of what he said in the codes, and since most people project their imagination on him, everybody's satisfied. People that hate him say he's not saying anything. The people who think he can do no wrong, he's always right about whatever they're looking for.
Right.
And it's kind of this funny little trick that he did so that in a way his legacy would survive, that he would actually fulfill that one prophecy that even poor James Randi cannot face, and that is that he is far more famous and topical now than he ever was 4.5 centuries ago.
Let's grab one more call here. This is TJ from Rhode Island, good friend of the program. Hey, TJ, welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to take the answer off the air, and hello to John, and I should say Aspasia Trillistos to you. And the first part question is that are you comfortable with any non-Western tradition references that will complement or fill what I'm going to christen the highfalutin title of the Great Prophetic Diurnal Dearth that you mentioned earlier in the broadcast? And secondly, any opinion that you might choose to comfortably offer on Billy Meyer and the Playar. Full disclosure, I strongly share their rather anti-clerical position. But thank you for the opportunity, and I'll let you go and listen for it off the air.
Thank you, TJ.
Okay, TJ, that first part, I'm kind of my head spinning. I don't quite know what you mean about the diurnal, but I can speak about the Pleiadian prophecies. I also read them. I find Billy Meyer's prophecies very interesting. They, for whatever people argue about whether he actually had Pleiadian contacts or not, I simply look at what he's writing and documenting, and he's often very accurate. And one of the things that he and I share, although in a very different way, is that we do not allow the front-loaded dogmas, politics, or anything to kind of get in the way of what we're seeing. And it's a certain knack one has. I don't know how he does it, but I do it through practicing the science of no self-realization. That the self is always this construct of personality that society gives us, like I'm called John Hogue, that's my personality. That's the mask, because society, I contend, does not let people actually grow from their childhood into their true, authentic nature. They put Christian on them, or American, or Jew, or Russian, or and so forth, all the identities. Nothing wrong with identities. Except but what would be right about one day you're convinced by your teachers to think that you are the hammer rather than the person holding the hammer, and then the hammer's job is to build something rather than you to be identified with it. That's the problem with identity, is people don't use it as a tool. They're not trained to use it as a tool, and that's why we're called persons, personalities. It comes from the Latin Greek root of persona, sound through a theatrical mask in Greek tragedies. It is the happy face, sad face masks of comedy. It is personality that's a mask. And yet, it would be great if people delved back into the origins of words, because they would find how they've been dirtied over the years. Right. For instance, the word that means enlightenment in Greek, the lifting of the veil to the light, is apocalypse. Apocalypse is what Buddha had under the Bodhi tree, I would contend, when he became enlightened. He had an apocalypse. But, the way we look at the word, it's been dirtied by the people who are afraid of losing their personalities. So their view of apocalypse is it's not a good thing. It's the end of everything they think that's theirs, which actually enlightenment takes away that never was. Just illusions. And so the personality, the ego, is very afraid of the apocalypse, the real apocalypse. So from that point of view, I come into this work. It's why I can make accurate political predictions, because I don't have a dog in the fight. I kind of play this game where I'm looking back at our times, a few hundred years in the future, where I'm looking from a place where politics is no longer run by ego and greed and fear and mass hysteria. It's run by love. It's run by self-awareness. And from that point of view, a point of view that anyone can have, because the odd thing is, what a lot of people are programmed to live this present moment, like some people live it as if it was 12,000 years ago. Some people live it as if it was medieval times from their attitudes. Some people who are visionaries live it as it will be 200-300 years from now. I mean, even Gene Roddenberry tried to, in a lot of ways, was seeing a world and trying to live a world that was humanist and hopeful, like his Star Trek series that he created. He lived in he had a 23rd century point of view about this eternity of the present, just like somebody like Ayatollah Khomeini had maybe a 14th century view of the present. Mm-hmm. It goes both ways.
John, we've got, sadly, just a minute left here with you. I thought 2 hours was going to be enough. It wasn't even close to enough because there's so many things we didn't get a chance to talk about yet. But in the minute we've got left, obviously we talked about your website. I don't know if social media is a place that folks should follow you on, but whatever you want people to be looking for, give them that information now.
Yeah, definitely. Social media. I've got 2 Facebook pages, a public page and a private page, but they're really both public. Just one limits me to 5,000 people.
Right.
And I would invite you all to join that. I would invite you all to come to HogueProphecy.com. That's HOGUE, like the wine, prophecy.com. And I'm also inviting any of you who are interested to have a direct reading from me. I do online readings, something I haven't done readings for 26 years, and I came back to it last year, at the end of last year. And so if you're interested, just go to my website. You'll see just below the main picture of the Nostradamus articles that are there, there'll be a little information about the Hogue Bulletin at HogueProphecy.com. It's written there. Just give me an email, put Hogue Reading on it, and then I can give you more information about the reading, how to pay for it, and all that stuff. And I'd love to do readings for you.
That sounds great, and I hope you'll come back, because I do want to talk about some of the things that you have seen prophesized that we just didn't get to tonight, and there's some pretty cool stuff there that we should be talking about. So hopefully we can do that soon.
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, it's. I think I told Orion, your producer, I said it's going to be a very fast 2 hours.
It goes very quickly. John, you're terrific. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to talk again soon.
Thank you, JV. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. All right. We're going to take a break. We'll come back, wrap things up for tonight. It's Beyond Reality Radio. Please support the program. Go to patreon.com/Johaw. That's JOHAW. Well, thank you, John Hogue, for being with us. That was a great conversation, and we definitely needed more time. I don't know how. I mean, I thought 2 hours was going to be enough, Orion. It just wasn't, because we didn't get. John has a bunch of predictions that we wanted to talk about tonight, like, is a war with Iran imminent, or will the trade war between the U.S. and China end? What's the future of the economy? A whole bunch of things that we just didn't get to. So we'll definitely have him back on as soon as we can to go over at least those things. Maybe we'll focus a little bit more on the predictions this time around. Anyway, thanks for being here tonight, everybody. We've got a great show tomorrow night. We're going to be talking with G.L. Davies. He's an author and an investigator, and he'll share a true account of a couple that was torn apart by paranormal entity and paranormal activity. It was the inspiration for a couple of books he's written. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm JV. We'll see you tomorrow night. Thanks for being here.
Beyond Reality Paranormal is hosted by J.V. Johnson and produced by Orion Palmer and Slick Eddie Edwards. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please consider supporting the program either through your podcast platform, click on the link in the description, or on Patreon at Johaw Productions. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Paranormal, or you have a recommendation for a guest, contact our producer, Slick Eddie Edwards. Eddie is spelled with a Y, at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com.